This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Methodify by Delvinia. Get real-world customer feedback in hours, not weeks. Schedule your demo and get a free $20 Amazon gift card. Go to methodify.it/BeanCast and Methodify it today. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 591, The Little Guys. For Monday, May 4th, 2020, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. In the early days of the quarantine, the pundits wondered how much of a hit digital advertising would take. But now, after a couple months of this, the triopoly at least is doing just fine, even great. But is this good news? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, why digital ad taxation plans are ultimately unviable, capitalizing on toilet paper's magic moment, whether we can still be funny in ads, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and principal consultant of the Difference Engine. Ms. Farrah Bostic is back. Hi, I'm Farrah. How are you?
I'm all right, Bob. It's been, what, 3, 4, 5 years?
Not 3, 4, 5 years.
I mean, just since January.
You're losing time in quarantine. That's not a good sign. Now, also with us, we welcome back the person behind Lifestyle, Health, and Wellness PR Consultancy, Erica Braverman PR, Ms. Erica Braverman. Hi, Erica.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, next, we have the founder and executive creative director of Creative Outhouse and host of the Creative Upheaval podcast, Mr. Rudy Fernandez is here. Hi, Rudy.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me. It's happy to be quarantined with you.
We're sharing a quarantine moment. And finally, he's the author of 6 Pixels of Separation and Control-Alt-Delete, the founder of the 6 Pixels Group, author, speaker, podcaster, blogger, and many other things, Mr. Mitch Joel. Hi, Mitch.
Bobby, how are you?
I'm well. Well, as little as a few weeks ago, we were talking about the potential collapse of all digital advertising revenue. I mean, it seemed like every article I was reading was talking about how even the big players were going to be affected by this. But now we see that Amazon's ad business is as robust as the rest of their business under quarantine. Google is posting gains, and Facebook seems largely unaffected by everything. They're still making money. Mitch, is this just a symptom of the current crisis, or is this another sign that digital has completely taken over the ad world and there's nothing we can do about it? What would you say is behind what's going on in the digital ad space right now?
It's probably a little bit of both and maybe a whole lot of nothing at the same time. I think that there's a crisis going on. I don't know if you guys heard about this thing. It's called COVID-19. I don't think we can take this sort of moment as a snapshot and relay this against what we'll call reality. It's hard to tell because we don't know what reality is anymore. We also don't know what normal is anymore, and many people think normal is broken, so we're probably not going to go back to that normal. But I think what we're seeing is a reality that's going to have major ramifications. I do believe that the transition that we're seeing currently can become habitual. And if it becomes habitual, I think it will hollow out traditional players even more. And I don't think it's because of digital advertising on its own. I think the reality of the situation is that a lot of the players may not make it out of this, that we're on the traditional side, that we're heavily ridden with debt, that we're on the verge anyways, and we're already seeing the beginning of that, and the furloughing and the laying off and all that sort of stuff. And it is true, you're laying this against a situation where Google generated close to $34 billion this quarter. YouTube hit about 4 billion. Amazon was up close to 45% with close to 4 billion. Everyone's looking really, really good. So look, there is a lot of downward pressure on pricing right now, which is normal. There's a pullback from certain types of advertisers right now, which again is all normal in an abnormal world, of course. But advertisers and brands are going to need a place to go. And I don't think that the banging of the drum that I started in the early 2000s has changed here as we sit in May 2020, which is that, digital and automation will always be the answer. If anything, what I think from the digital side is that this is truly a digital marketer's moment to really demonstrate what they can, deliver and go against. And I don't think, if you look at the sort of macro perspective of what's going on, we can't not look at a business like Shopify that has had 190% growth just year to year in terms of their stock price. And what it is, it's a million merchants in there who are generating close to Black Friday levels in sales every single day now. And this is the new world where, look, as advertisers, we have direct response, we have lead gen, and we have brand or brand story. And I think that for the foreseeable future, we are going to see a lot of the traditional and non-traditional players really try and amp up their sales with more direct response and more lead gen.
Well, that part of it's what bothers me most about this stat, because when we're talking about this, we're not talking about all this old media being shifted to the new platform. People running old media, the big brands, they're not doing as much in advertising across the board. This is mainly driven by direct-to-consumer brands. I mean, you mentioned Shopify. That's what's driving all this digital revenue. So I'm not sure if it's so much a shift as much as it is a bunch of DTC people understanding that this is their moment.
No, Bob. We need to look at the macroeconomics of the situation. When we are in a moment like this, historically, the reality is that the ad industry has this massive contraction. And we are seeing that and we are living through it. I think the only difference is because of how digitized we've become, there's this release valve on the other side that allows those people who want to do more or can do more to hop over into this more lead gen direct response model. And if you look at things like, for example, Twitter is saying they're basically seeing a 30% decline in advertising for April, but that's because they're primarily event driven in their platforms. So I don't think it's because DTC and they're really smart. I think everybody's getting a lot smarter and they have a lot more options on the table.
That's a really, really good point. Rudy, I'd love to get you to weigh in on this a little bit, because from a standpoint of digital advertising, we've been talking over and over again about how everything's going digital, everything's moving to the digital platform. Do you agree with Mitch that this is going to stay as a permanent shift and that this is something that can, last beyond COVID?
Well, given my crystal ball is on the fritz today, but I think a lot of what we're seeing are people who are at the bottom end of the funnel who are looking for something, and digital advertising works. I think for branding, I'm not sure that it'll sustain, but again, that's my opinion. More people are staying home, more people are engaging online. They're not doing the things they normally do. So it's a little hard to say whether or not it'll sustain. I think it's true that people will always choose a path of least resistance, and being online and shopping digitally or searching digitally is a lot easier. But for new categories, for new brands, for telling a story, I think you'll need digital and other aspects as well. And I don't think they're going away.
I also just would add on to that when I say digital, I don't just mean direct response and lead gen. If you look at YouTube, it's a very brandable and playable platform for many.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And you see it across the board too. This isn't I don't want to have this sort of traditional conversation where it's like it's all search and targeting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that I think that the hollowing out on the other side of some of the bigger traditional media players that are really going to struggle is going to force people back into digital. And I do believe that this could be the moment where you have all three of those pillars, lead gen, direct response, and brand, finding its place and finding a better home. I mean, we're going to talk about later, but some brands are doing some killer branding on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. That I don't disagree. I think that, but I'm thinking, for example, I'm thinking about radio. Right now, radio, people aren't commuting, so they're not listening to radio. But on non-COVID times, about 93% of the American public listens to the radio every week. So I don't see that as,
Are we sure on that data? Because I keep hearing stuff like that, and I'm wondering if it is all commute. Are people not sitting at home still and listening to the radio as they would on their commute? Are we? Because I've heard the same thing with podcasting. There's been a slight drop, but it hasn't been as significant as people are sort of armchair quarterbacking on.
Well, on the podcasting, I can just on the groups that I'm in, pretty much. I don't know about any research. I do know that just based on the various groups I'm in, and maybe Bob can chime in. We've seen people are talking between a 20 and a 40% drop of their listenership. Certainly, I've noticed it on our podcast.
Yeah, there's a shift in behavior going on, definitely in the marketplace. It's without commuting, there is no need to listen to audio programming, but I think people are coming back to it as people get into the routine. Farrah, I always go to you in the third person because I want to get us a little bit of perspective, and you're the best person to run this stuff by. Are we drinking the Kool-Aid here, or are you in agreement with what's basically been said so far?
Well, I think it makes sense for brands to kind of shift away from brand at the moment, not just because of the economic situation, which is certainly, incentivizing kind of pulling sales forward in time, given that their sort of traditional channels of retail have been gutted by people not being allowed to go to retail. But I think the other part of this is actually not just the channel, but the content. And you are hearing from some publishers that they're seeing brands pull out of more brand level advertising with them because they don't want to be next to COVID coverage. And you're getting, record audiences for the president's daily briefing, if that's what we're calling it.
You worked really hard
but
around that.
No one wants to be advertising against that, right? And the brand stories right now are very, of the moment. I'm sure you guys have talked about the sort of template that everybody's running right now of we care about frontline workers, and when things get back to normal, we'll still be here for you. At some point, brand managers are going to want to break free, and they're going to want to do something. And I guess I have been waiting now for 20 years for the big moment where brand really happens in digital and doesn't need the mass media channels of particularly television. And I think TV will have changed only because, TV is now, connected TV for a lot of people, but it'll still be video. It'll still be video. It'll still be video in something that looks like print. But I'm just waiting for people to feel like they can do something other than direct response and lead gen in digital and do it at scale, as opposed to only doing it when they're desperate, or only doing it when it's the better place to be than on TV when or on podcasts where everybody's talking about COVID all the time. So I think some of this is about the channel and about the affordances of each of the channels. Some of this is still, if you're P&G, you still want biggest bang for your buck. You're going to do some TV, even though you're also doing loads of investment in digital. The question for me is, at what point do they feel free to go back to doing anything brand level in any channel? Because right now it's kind of a fraught proposition to start talking about your brand again outside the context of
what is branding anymore? I mean, what is branding?
Well,
we talk about it like it's like a TV commercial, and branding has become much more about experience-driven opportunities over the past few years. Actually, it's always been that way, but we're just recognizing this fact.
I think there's still a huge role to be played of just, good old-fashioned brand storytelling where there isn't an event or some sort of microsite or app or whatever sort of thing that can be called experience. I agree. Believe me, I've been saying since 1999 that brands live in more places than the ad. But the ability to tell those bigger stories to large audiences is still the provenance of television. And until that breaks, I don't think the big marketers get divorced from TV, certainly. I think they can take that content and put it on digital platforms. YouTube is a terrific example of this. So are, Hulu and some of the other over-the-top streaming services, the ones that accept advertising anyway. And so, I think I'm just sort of waiting for someone to stop for some big brands to really embrace digital as a place for building those complete experiences, not as stunts, not as events, but as part of the bigger storytelling around the brand that makes you feel good about them, makes you feel like they share your values, makes you feel like they're on their way up and doing something, that they're really salient in culture, all of that stuff. That's not happening in my Instagram feed. My Instagram feed is full of people trying to sell me branded masks right now. That's all I'm seeing.
I'd like to jump in. I'm not sure I agree 100%. I think that I want to maybe clarify. Maybe I wasn't saying that digital is direct response lead gen and not brand story. I think if you really look at the numbers, they speak volumes. I mean, we are talking about 34 billion at Google, 4 billion at Amazon, 4 billion for YouTube. We're talking about 17.5 billion for Facebook. That's just this quarter. I mean, you add it up and then you look at the overall sort of number of just advertising, and you'll see that they are playing there in more ways than we can imagine. So I think that's an important thing to one remember. The other part is we're really talking about sort of this digital advertising moment. And what we are seeing factually is a pullback from advertisers and a downward pressure on price. And when those two factors come into play in conjunction with the crisis, you do see certain factors happen. I think that we do have this moment where it is true, but I could make a really good argument with two words, Kylie Cosmetics, that it's not just direct response or lead gen, but there was a complete and very holistic brand story that was engaged with beyond just a paid thing, but just great content and great storytelling. So the capabilities for it to deliver $1 billion in sales is very, very prevalent and very, very true and real. You could look at Dollar Shave Club. You could look at so many brands that went beyond that, that forced even brands like Unilever to play in this court. So I don't think it's a question of, can we, because of this, not tell? I think that ship has sailed, and brands have done a great job at building really solid and strong brands in digital, whether or not they're playing in the direct response or lead gen space.
To be clear here, though, when we're talking about this growth that's going on in digital advertising, we're just talking about the big players. You know, these numbers are not being reflected.
The numbers are good. The numbers are good at Snap. They're good if you go down. But you are right that in general, it is a 3 network like television was. It is that world here too. There's no doubt about that. But
in the television ecosystem, there was always the opportunity for small players to make money on the local level or something. But it's just
it was affiliate based.
You have publishers, and ad tech players who are being kind of pushed out by all this, and they're still being pushed out in this time of crisis. So, you know,
well, I don't think they were being pushed out so much as they weren't able. They didn't create a platform worthy enough of play. I mean, I think fundamentally the media companies and the advertisers are looking for better advantages. They don't like knocking on Facebook and Google's door with all their analytics and proof of what an ad is worth. So the truth is, if you had startups that were able to really compete and add value there, they would be. I mean, this is the whole struggle of brands taking their media in-house on the automated side. It's absolutely absurd to me at this point to be doing that. So I don't think that's 100% fair accurate. I just think ultimately you're going to play where the customers are, and now the mass media is Instagram, and it is YouTube, and it is Facebook, and it is Google. That is mass media, and it's mass media across multiple screens.
Yeah, I wish I could agree with you that you're going to go where the audience is, and that's where things are going to that's where the money's going to be spent. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Except that it's happening programmatic.
Is up again.
Right, and we have programmatic going on. You know, it's just like these computers are placing these buys without really putting any kind of human interest into it. You know, really understanding where the audience is going and how they're dealing with the crisis. And Farrah's point is well taken. I mean, TV viewership is up, so why not advertise more on television? I mean, it's almost like we've turned off our brain in this process.
Well, I think people also watch TV differently. And that's the other problem to this, which is they skip the ads when given the choice.
Erica, I want to get you in on this real quick because this dominance by the tech giants, you know, they're taking all the air out of the room for the entire digital ecosystem, and there's some people out there who are saying that it could result in a backlash when all this is behind us. What do you think about the positioning of these companies right now? And are they in danger of getting some blowback for taking so much of the revenue out of the digital ecosystem at this crucial time?
I don't know that they are. I mean, look, with TV, the price of entry is very difficult. It's very high. But with digital, I do think it's a bit more dispersed. I mean, I run PR for a podcast network, and their sponsorship sales are up. You know, their listenership is up. I think it just is a matter of being smart, like you said, and using your brain and kind of seeing where your audience is going. I don't think that necessarily Google or Twitter or YouTube or Facebook do have like a monopoly on advertising in digital right now. I think, and I also think that there's a much lower entry price for them. So I don't know that I see, any kind of death of digital advertising because there's, major players. That was your question, right?
It's more about the backlash. I think it's more a concern that at some point people are going to wake up and go, yeah, sure, Google did well, Amazon did well, Facebook did well during the coronavirus crisis. But now that it's over, what are you doing for us now? It's just like, we gave you all this money. I mean, it's just like, I don't know that I agree with this position, but a lot of people are starting to look at it and say there's a potential for a PR backlash against them after the crisis is over. What do you think?
Against, like, the Googles of the world?
Yeah, against the Googles of the world. That's right.
I don't see it. I think it's just, I honestly think, especially like the younger generation who doesn't watch as much TV, I think it's welcomed. I don't see a backlash, though. I think it's an interesting, thought exercise.
Rudy, I cut you off. You were trying to jump in on something. I wanted to know if you still wanted to say something.
Oh, that's all right. Actually, I was just thinking on what you said about the backlash on Google. What I was going to say earlier is not relevant right now. But I think, the funny thing about Google is they've already had a lot of negative press, as has Amazon, but they deliver a really good product. They deliver good service, and it's hard to compete with that search engine and with that buying of Amazon. So I do think they'll probably take a lot of the air of the room and make it more difficult for others to compete. But at the same time, they fulfill their mission, and people keep coming back to them because they do what they say they're going to do in the end.
The big question for me is going to be whether or not the sort of big tech backlash in terms of privacy and data and all that stuff that we saw literally up until the moment we all shut down because of COVID-19, if that it has a resurgence, or if people through this realize, well, I might not have liked the fact that they had all my data and everything, but kind of needed them a lot, and realized that as we were going through this, that I basically live on these platforms, and whatever they're doing, I still need them more than whatever else the other terrible side is of the data sharing and all the issues they had there. That to me is a bigger question, whether or not that becomes the sort of anger and angst towards big tech if that comes back, because it feels like that this pandemic really helped them.
I think, in my opinion, is people seem to be relinquishing their privacy more and more. I think if they're going to hit a backlash, it's if they somehow, the story becomes that they're taking control away from the user, either because they're keeping competitors out or they're not letting us see the information we want to see. If that starts to be the story, not so much privacy, but they're taking away control, then you'll see a backlash because people don't like you taking control away from them.
And Jeff Bezos is being called to Washington on that currently, so we shall see.
Yes, we shall see. Well, we're going to continue this conversation about digital advertising, talking about states trying to tax digital advertising. We've talked about that before on the show, but apparently, according to a Forbes article, the plans are completely unviable. We'll discuss that and get to the bottom of that story in just a second. But first, I want to talk about our sponsor, Methodify by Delvinia, and give you or someone you know another chance to get a $20 Amazon gift card just for checking them out. Now, behind every brand are real people like you or your coworkers or your employees making decisions. And if you're all making those decisions right now, you're doing so while in a very stressful situation, and you're talking to consumers who are also highly stressed and very, very sensitive. Some might even say oversensitive. Say one thing wrong in your advertising and you could unleash a social media firestorm against your brand. This is where our sponsor, Methodify by Delvinia, can help you. Methodify collects real feedback from your actual customers on concepts or creative before you release it into the world. And the whole process takes you hours, not days. So really, really fast. Methodify gives insight professionals and senior marketing people the information they need to power better decisions that will protect their brand and themselves. Now, just a few weeks ago, Methodify was used to test digital creative for a fast food chain to make sure the messaging wasn't tone deaf, and the information they got was invaluable for them. Methodify can do the same for you. Actual customer feedback is a game changer because right now, brands that wait and see are going to wind up making all kinds of costly mistakes. Now, sure, connect with your customers, build relationships, build trust, build fans, do it all, but test everything right now. And Methodify can get you started today. To find out more about Methodify and to set up a demo, just Methodify it. Go to methodify.it/BeanCast. That's methodify.it/BeanCast. And as a way of saying thanks, every BeanCast listener who signs up and completes a demo will receive a $20 Amazon gift card just for your time. And don't keep this offer to yourself. I'm sure you know someone in your organization, someone who works for you, someone who's a coworker, maybe someone who's just an associate at another company who might be able to take advantage of this. So tell them about it. That address again is Methodify it, methodify.it/BeanCast. And we thank them very much for their support of our program. Well, there was this interesting article in Forbes outlining why states taxing digital advertising was a good thing, but that the current plans ran afoul of both U.S. federal legislation, and specifically the Permanent Internet Tax Freedom Act, and the First Amendment's free speech protections, which I find a little bit shady. I'm not quite sure I agree with that. But Farrah, proponents argue that the tech giants have made billions without being appropriately taxed and that this is a big disincentive for them to police their ad networks. Is this a legitimate claim, and is taxation the answer? What's your feelings about the way these tax laws have been structured, and are they viable?
Yeah, so I have to admit, I had not heard about these states passing these laws, and I also hadn't heard about PITFA, the Permanent Internet Tax Freedom Act. I knew that that had been a temporary act. I didn't realize it had been made permanent in 2016, but, fell asleep at that particular wheel. The thing that's interesting about this is that it originates with an op-ed written by Paul Romer, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist at the time, and he wrote this piece in the Times saying, that the big digital platform companies, Facebook, Google, they've been making a ton of money, essentially eroding the public commons, the place where we all come together and kind of assemble the shared facts that allow us to self-govern and do so in a way that makes any sense at all. And they, the accusation is they're havens for misinformation and hate speech. That's bad for democracy. So the solution is to tax targeted advertising sales, which is it feels like a massive leap to me.
That's pretty much the thought we had when we discussed it for the first time. The first time Maryland passed their law, or was going to pass their law. I mean, it just seems so ludicrous that they could do this.
Well, I mean, so you have a couple of problems. One is you have the Internet Tax Freedom Act, which prohibits taxes on access to the internet, though there are kind of carve-outs there where you'll still see a state-level sales tax on your cable bill or your, whoever your internet service provider bill is. That kind of got grandfathered in. Probably won't last for very long, but for now it's still sort of legal. The other one is sort of discriminatory taxation on electronic commerce. So this is something that's calling out a specific kind of e-commerce, which is targeted advertising on these digital platforms, and taxing that specially. So Probably no. If someone wants to challenge that, a district court and an appellate court and then a Supreme Court is going to say PITFA says you can't do it. And so, yeah, it probably just falls away on that level. The interesting thing to me is, like, again, makes sense that an economist would look for a market solution, which is what essentially they're using tax policy to create a financial disincentive to selling targeted ads. Except that my simple answer to that, if I'm a platform, is I price it into the price of the digital ads. Like, whatever. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
What level of tax are you going to levy that makes it so that I don't want to sell this thing that brands really want, whether they need it or not? Like, highly targeted digital advertising isn't something that exists solely because Google offers it. It exists because it's something that brands think is really good. So, I don't see how you change the basic kind of value exchange of targeted advertising value to brands, over what will be a pittance in the end of a sales tax, setting aside the fact that it won't pass federal muster. The First Amendment argument doesn't make a ton of sense either, that there is not like a vested sort of First Amendment right to buy targeted advertising. Like that's
right.
I have the right to speak, but not to any particular audience and not on any particular platform. The government can't prohibit me from speaking, but it can limit the ways I speak. That is already well established in First Amendment law. So that's not a good reason not to do it. My bigger thing is, like, I just don't think it addresses the problem. Like, if your complaint is they don't pay enough in tax, then figure out how to close those corporate income tax loopholes. Increase the corporate income tax. Do something to get these people to pay taxes. They tend not to. And so if that's your problem, then sure, tax policy makes sense as a solution. But if you're trying to fix misinformation and hate speech, you have two problems. One is PITFA. The other is a lot of the misinformation and hate speech isn't happening in paid advertising. It's happening in posts. So if you want to change that, then you're not looking at tax policy. You're looking at Section 230 of the Internet Communications Decency Act. You're looking at how do we do what Mark Zuckerberg has said he wants, which is to regulate these platforms as something between a telecom company and a publisher. Because they've said, ooh, we're something else. We're a platform. You can't touch us. And 230 has protected them. And there are good reasons for 230 to do that. But it's also clearly run afoul of all these other sort of social incentives that we have.
I want to go back.
If you want to do it, my thing is ban targeted ad sales. Just ban targeted ads. That would be the regulation I would propose. If you want to really disincentivize it, just disallow it.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's just disincentivizing hate speech. I mean, it's also a large degree about a money grab. I mean, a lot of this revenue is going out of state, and a lot of the states are going, we want some of this revenue to stay with us. And your suggestion to tax the companies who aren't paying their fair share of taxes is a good one, except that only works at the federal level. It doesn't get to the states. And the states are trying to figure out how to get money from the advertising that's placed in front of screens, in front of eyeballs that are physically in their state, which is a huge technical problem, because anybody can go on a VPN and nobody knows where they're coming from. So it's just like there's no way to accurately depict how many ads are being displayed within a state.
There's fundamentally two things happening at the same time, though, when you really think about it. One is the general tech question, which is an e-commerce question, a question we've been asking for a long time, which is why should it be exempt? And I think that is a very fair and valid question that has to be examined. And the sort of other concept we have to be able to hold in our brain at the same time is sort of where you're going, Bob, which is that, at the state and local level, there's sort of a disconnect between that and just the pure function of e-commerce. So here I sit, I'm in Montreal, but let's say I was in Ottawa, and that's where Shopify is. Is that where all the merchants are? Is that where all the money is feeding through? Should it be because their physical HQ is there versus where the actual buyers are or where the ads are being run? And I think that this is where that sort of First Amendment rights is being brought in. I'm saying this as a Canadian, but I can tell you that in Canada, they really are thinking and contemplating how they do this. And so I think if we can, as smart business people, hold these two concepts at the same time, why should it be exempt, with the fact that how do you figure this out at a state and local level for things as big as e-commerce? What you have is the culmination of not this news item in the editorial or how we think about it, but it becomes extremely controversial because of those two concepts.
I think the other problem here is that ad sales in general are, collateral is different. You have to pay sales if there's state sales tax, then you pay sales tax on produced collateral because it becomes a good. You don't have sales tax on services, and so one way around it, I suppose, if the states are really just looking to gather some tax revenue, is to reclassify ads or targeting as a good instead of as a service. That what you're buying is a thing, not an act. And so, buying a noun, not a verb. So that might be one way around it. But I think you still have a problem of like the locus of the transaction. If I'm, a WPP agency sitting in New York City and I buy an ad on behalf of a client sitting in Cleveland, and that ad publisher is sitting in Raleigh, like, where does the tax get paid?
Yeah.
Well, the WPP could just say, we're actually based in the UK, so good luck.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, like, there are still nominally taxes to be paid. Collecting, it's another matter. But the issue is just like you say, there are some targeting questions or not targeting. There's some tracking questions of like, how do you know that those ads were served in this geo? Facebook won't get hit. Google won't get hit because it's California. So California will be the one who has to pass the sales tax, not Maryland, not Nebraska, not New York State. So there's sort of an issue of sort of what's the long arm of the law that allows any of these states to gather a sales tax on a transaction that may or may not have happened in their state.
And this point's really
big platform.
This point that you're making right now is a really important part of this, because when we first discussed this on the show, that we talked a lot about the fact that exactly what you're saying. The big players are not going to be affected by it, but it's going to trickle down to somebody, and it's going to be the little players within the state who are going to get hammered with taxes. It's going to really take on the publishers of like the local newspapers putting their website out there.
But when that little person pushes to become a $1 billion company like Kylie Cosmetics, the question is that fair? That's all. We have to be able to ask these questions of why should it be exempt?
But, I think, Bob, one of the things that the bigger companies are going to, going back to your comment about the backlash in the brands, that's one place where they might feel the pain. Right now, states are experiencing a lot of shortfalls. They're going to be looking for money somewhere. If they start to push the Googles and the Facebooks, and they don't have a lot of people who are on their side, then I know it's hard to track where the tax revenue should go, but I have a feeling that states might be looking for revenue in all sorts of places, and they may see Google and Facebook as a good place to start digging.
There is another workaround, which again exists at the state level with like cable providers and telcos, which is that they pay a service fee to the state. It is classed as a service fee, so therefore it's not a tax, so probably it circumvents PITFA. If you want to generate revenue off of these companies doing business in your state, it doesn't take much to demonstrate they've done some kind of business in your state. So now the question is, how do you calculate the service fee? But the nice thing about the service fee is that it's not based on sales, and that might help disentangle the issue of, well, where did the transaction take place? I think on the question of the smaller players being hit by it, this seems to, until California wants to have one of these taxes, which will be a huge boon to California, or Washington in the case of Amazon and Microsoft. Like, I don't see how it helps Maryland, Nebraska, New York State. And I certainly don't see how it helps local publishers in those states, who will be the only ones actually paying that sales tax. So, but I guess the thing I kind of keep feeling befuddled about is, like, we could work out what a reasonable tax policy is, and I can say, well, in the next Congress, they should amend PITFA and they should amend Section 230, and then you can both regulate and tax these platforms to get them to do the things that you want them to do, namely pay taxes and cut down on misinformation and hate speech. But like, I don't understand how this one thing is seen as this kind of magic bullet that's going to get us to a place where all of a sudden they go, oh, you're right, we have a duty to the public. That kind of beggars belief for me.
Well, another thing that beggars belief is, of course, toilet paper. Rarely has toilet paper gotten such an incredible moment in the promotional sun. Shortages and hoarding have led to we-like presence in the public consciousness. People are searching for toilet paper like they were searching for Wii's a few years back. It's crazy. Yeah. So, Rudy, are the manufacturers adequately capitalizing on the moment or simply squandering their opportunity right now? I want a creative perspective right now on the way the toilet paper businesses are taking advantage of this situation.
Yeah. It's funny because as we all know, this run on toilet paper has not been because of some new development in toilet paper or some new way of using it or some new technology or some new player. It's just because of the quirk in human behavior of zero risk bias. So I think they were caught off guard, obviously. Caught sitting down. Sorry for the pun. But I think,
caught with their pants down is what you're going to say. Go on.
Yeah. So I think, if you look around, some of the bigger players like Georgia Pacific or Kimberly-Clark, that's Northern and Continental, they seem to be sort of checking the boxes. They're sort of on top. So they ran ads that basically that talked about their supply side. We'll get you that toilet paper, and it had real big music with it. And I thought it was a little weird myself. But Kimberly-Clark with Continental did something interesting where they created the Share a Square hashtag, and it's not that imaginative. They donated money to the United Way. They're donating money and getting their consumers to participate. They got Jimmy Kimmel actually to participate in it as well on his show and got a big boost there. So they're starting to expand that into other countries like United Kingdom and South Africa and Switzerland and Canada even. So be on the lookout for that.
The weird thing about what you're describing for me, and I want Erica to weigh in on this, it's just like it sounds like the crisis team is running the marketing department right now at most of the toilet paper companies, and it's like basically they're trying to make sure that they look good even though they're kind of taking advantage of the situation.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was going to say is there are who I think is doing well and doing creative work that is probably more noticeable are the smaller brands that you've never heard of. There's a little brand called Bitsby, I think in Chicago, their sales are up, their website visits are up 800%, and they do a thing with they have bamboo toilet paper and it's sustainable. There's another company called Who Gives a Crap that's doing some interesting things as well that you could, and they have poo dumps, which means they deliver toilet paper.
Oh, no doubt. The DTC people are doing a phenomenal job as always because they're being a little bit more nimble and a little bit more creative. But not seeing it elsewhere. Erica, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that crisis comms teams probably should be controlling the marketing for the bigger brands that have a lot to lose.
Yeah.
I think this is definitely a good I don't want to say a good time, but this is more of a time for the smaller brands in this space to take risks with their messaging. But
so you don't think a bigger brand could get away with some kind of nimble, funny, tongue-in-cheek advertising at this moment? It's just
I think the keyword is could though. They also have so much to lose. The temperature of the media changes so rapidly that I don't know that it's worth it for them.
Continental or Quilted Northern rather did have a really creative campaign before this, and they switched gears quickly. And I'll tell you, actually, if you want to know who I think should be taking advantage of this, and they aren't, are Kohler and Toto and people who make bidets. They need to seize the bidet. But
I don't agree with that crisis comms should be leading this. I think that they are partners that you pull in when you have situations like this. That being said, I think it does take a greater calling to agree that if you are in the middle of a pandemic and you have a product that's being hoarded and that most people can't get access to, whether you're advertising or not, if it's not on the shelves, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be efficient in terms of what the brand is trying to do. I also think we have to consider the consumer consideration set, which is they're not really being driven right now by brand or who's cute or who's funny or who's tugging at my heartstrings. They're driven right now by desperation. So you're not really looking for any form of consideration or change from the consumer standpoint. It's luck. I walked into Target. There happens to be a 6-pack there, so that's what I get. I think you have to worry less about the ad being tone deaf or whether crisis and comms is involved with the creative team, and more in touch with just what's the consumer mindset today, and is there real value in going down this road when they're not in the consideration or brand switching stage. They're just trying to get through life. I do think that this idea of the bidet and the alternatives, your squatty potties, I think those types of brands can have a moment where they can sort of insert themselves because there is a bit of a vacuum, on the other side.
I've got to interject for the sake of Wendy Cooper. I have to interject Easy Pro Go in here as another one of these brands, because it's just like whenever she hears Squatty Potty, she goes nuts because she doesn't. She's a competitor.
It's just the thing is this: on one side you have the producer saying there's not a lack or a shortage, and on the other hand you have hoarding and just aisles that are empty. And that's where we have to focus.
But that neither of those things are actually true. There isn't a shortage of toilet paper, but there is a shortage. There is a shortage of consumer toilet paper. There are two parts of the market: consumer and commercial. It's commercial that is in surplus because businesses are closed, so they're not buying the thin, scratchy paper you get in a public restroom, and the quilted northerns, the Charmins, the cottonelles, the stuff we use at home, we're using more of it at home. The narrative
those
about hoarding really drives me nuts because it's not what's happening.
But
people are provisioning.
Toilet paper sales are up. They're up about 60% overall. But it's true. In normal
they need more at home.
Yeah.
Than they needed
before. In normal circumstances, it's 50-50 more or less commercial to consumer. But going back to what Mitch is saying, I do think, as much as I love crazy creative stuff, but if you're on the top, if you're a quilted northern or a cottonelle, and let's say that they don't have any more of your toilet paper in the store right now, you do want to make sure when this is over that people are still going to buy your brand. So while the stuff they're doing is slightly boring and expected, they're just trying to hold ground, I think.
I think that's right.
I do think that brand tone. I'm sorry, Farrah.
Go ahead.
I do think that brand tone is just as important, and I agree that maybe advertising isn't as effective when your product is completely sold out. But I do want to say that brand tone is more important than ever, and it could have an extremely negative effect once COVID-19 is passed. If you decided to go the creative route, make a misstep as one of the top brands, you might have made a mistake that is permanent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also just the making promises you can't keep. The thing you wouldn't want to do right now is say there's plenty of toilet paper on the shelves. Mm-hmm. There is not, and they are not in a position to really be able to deal with it consistently, right? Yeah. There's only so many boxes you can load and unload at a time.
The message that we've heard. The message that we've heard is that they're saying that there's plenty of toilet paper. It's just not on the shelves. And we're not talking about commercial. We're talking about the fact that there is a supply chain challenge in getting a lot of stuff there. And when people hoard, it makes it harder to do the replenishment stuff. So I do think from a branding perspective, they're doing their best to calm nerves. And I think tone and voice definitely matter. I just think that if you are quote unquote advertising in the pure sense of what it is, you need to be very careful if it's a product during a pandemic that people are not having access to. You might want to sit it out, hold that budget. And when times are a little bit better, you can come back and tell them how great you are. Remember your Northern quilted and how much you loved your tushy. And there you go.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's almost it's almost like I planned this out, but we have a last topic which I want to cover, which kind of dovetails into what we've been discussing. And it's about humor. I mean, obviously people are dying. Many face financial hardships. The natural reaction in all this is to pull away from frivolous and humorous brand messaging. But at the same time, the success of brands such as Wendy's and Steakums in maintaining their humor on Twitter during the crisis seemed to belie this instinct, at least to a certain extent and for certain brands. Erica, does authenticity to brand always trump political correctness in such situations, or is this injudicious in some ways?
Yeah, I love this question. I think the term political correctness often seems to suggest automatic authenticity, but I don't think that tailoring your messaging during a global crisis takes away from authenticity at all. I think it's probably the opposite. And I think the key thing here when you are a brand that is going to use humor is to at least acknowledge that the times have changed. And I think that that's consistent across all the brands that have successfully been able to do this. So like Wendy's tweeted shortly after the shutdowns in America started taking effect that, I wrote this down, the little things can make all the difference sometimes. Get a free Junior Frosty with every drive-through order starting today. So I think that brands can strike that balance of humor and compassion, but communicators have to be very, very savvy, more savvy than ever, and just be immersed with the temperature in the media. On an even closer level.
Yeah, I mean, look, no matter what happens, this sort of hashtag too soon will always be there. But ultimately, people do need the escape valve. And they are turning to these platforms for it, be it YouTube, be it Instagram, be it Facebook, be it memes, whatever it is. We're all doing it. We're all sharing them. Some are inappropriate, some more than others. But there is always, from the brand perspective, and it's been this way before pandemics, that brands need to understand how to read the room. And they need to know when to be silent versus when they have actually something to say. There are moments when a brand does need to be brave. At the same time, there are moments where the brand needs to be authentic, but understanding. So when you look at things like Denny's, and they're sort of like, people might miss us, so let's make some virtual backgrounds for Zoom and whatever, or we're going to put Denny's into Animal Crossing, which are both things that they've done. You don't look at that and go tone deaf. You don't look at that and go too soon. You sort of, just either shake your head and go whatever, or you wind up talking about it on the BeanCast. But if you look at the sort of tone and sentiment that really resonates, like I thought the examples and some of the links that you sent, like the New Jersey one was great. It stuck to the tone, right? It's like, please make sure to stay at least one Bruce Springsteen apart from each other, and they have him laid out, vertically, horizontally rather. And they did it with Snooki, they did it with John Bon Jovi, all things related to Jersey. So at that point, it was kind of tasteful in a humor way. It resonates with the message and it sticks with the brand really well. And so ultimately, this is the message you'd sit down and speak to at the beginning of any creative briefing with our teams at the agency, which was, look, be sensible, don't be senseless. And now you want to just amp that up when you're sort of in the middle of a moment when anything can be taken any way.
Good point.
Sorry, that wasn't funny.
No, the thing about humor is that it goes back to what Erica was saying on the last topic. I mean, this idea of being humorous, it sounds like it's a great idea. It could be interesting. It could be engaging to a certain number of your audience, but it's also fraught with risk. I mean, it's the same thing that we always preach about real-time marketing. For every one dunk in the dark moment or Arby's hat from Pharrell, you end up saying something that's going to make a huge disaster for yourself. And the rest of the time, most of the time, 99% of the time, you're not getting any value out of it. So why play Russian roulette with that opportunity to maybe get something great out of things?
That's the humor thing, right? The humor thing is aligned with stand-up. If you don't do your reps and you don't sort of do your time standing up and seeing what people react to, and then by the time you're ready for your Netflix special, you know exactly where the joke lands and how it hits. You got to be a maniac if you're a brand to think, let's be funny now, if you haven't put in those reps.
Exactly. It should be consistent with your brand. And right now, the brands that can do it well are going to stand out, because finding something funny, it means you're able to distance yourself. It means you're able to. People need that, and you see that with the kind of things people are sharing right now.
Well, with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Farrah Bostic. You can find her at thedifferenceengine.co. That's C-O. Tell us what's going on in your world, Farrah. What would you like to promote?
Gardening. That's all I do. when I can't
Okay,
deal with talking about COVID and
are we talking about real
anymore.
gardening, or are we talking about Animal Crossing gardening? Because if we're talking about Animal Crossing gardening, I'm right there with you.
No, I can't look at any more screens. I've spent all day, I swear to God, every day since before the quarantine began in front of a screen. I've been on a huge project. So now when I have breaks in the day, it is spent outside, pulling up dandelions, literally anything that's not about COVID or quarantine. That's why I like gardening.
Awesome. Now, next up, we have Erica Braverman. You can find her at ericabravermanpr.com. Did I get that right, or did I get
yes,
that? Yeah, I did. Good. So what would you like to promote?
So please email me. Obviously, if you're looking for PR representation, I represent wellness, beauty, and lifestyle clients, but I'm also offering free advice and brainstorming sessions for especially women-owned startups. So if that's you, you can email me at ebraverman10@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Rudy Fernandez, you can find him and his agency at creativeouthouse.com. That's where he's got a creative boutique going on. Tell us what's going on in your world, Rudy. What would you like to promote? Rudy, are you still there?
Yes, I was muted. Yes, I wanted to build suspense. No, we do creative content, and a lot of our creative is based around human behavior and behavior change. And right now, if you go to creativeouthouse.com, you could download our template for a creative brief, and I'm offering free consultation for anybody who's beginning their projects or trying to figure out how to navigate this time. They could have a free brief and consultation with me on how to fill it out and help your creative teams. And our podcast is on our website as well, and it's called Marketing Upheaval.
And everybody should check it out.
Yeah. It's almost not as good as, but almost as good as this one.
Well, there are a few shows as good as this one, and I'll just say that with all humility. Last but not least, the man who invented podcasting, Mitch Joel. You can find him at sixpixels.com. That's where you can find about his book, his podcasts. He does all kinds of podcasts. He does a bass podcast. He does a metal podcast. You do all kinds of cool stuff. So tell us what's going on in your world.
Yeah, I'm hanging out. Everyone is. I would like to promote the fact that I just finished reading the new David Sedaris book, Themes and Variations, which falls very hotly on the fact that I finished his masterclass, which I enjoyed profusely. What I like most about this Themes and Variations is that it's, I think, $1 or $2 on Kindle. And it is not a full book. It's basically an essay plus, I would say. It's about 30 minutes or 45 minutes to read. I like the model. I think Amazon's making a smart play with this. I think David Sedaris is as well. And he's just brilliant and funny, and he's my spirit animal. So check it out. It's called Themes and Variations by David Sedaris.
That sounds like a great recommendation. He's a brilliant writer. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me about getting your podcast off the ground. And you can even find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, an agency called Harmon Brothers, the agency behind such viral successes as Squatty Potty and Poo-Pourri, is giving away a $100,000 ad campaign to struggling businesses with their, and Rudy, I love this. I don't know why. I think it just struck me funny at the time when I read it, but they're giving it away with their Poop to Gold giveaway. I thought this was really, I mean, it's not terribly clever, but it's kind of nice to see something like this going on, and it's kind of fits the modus operandi of a lot of agencies giving away something in this time of need.
Yeah, but if you look at their work, it's not known for its subtlety. It's very funny and very clever, and I love their story too, because after they had launched, their original Poo-Pourri, they had some hard times, and I think one of the guys was driving an Uber for a while until they took off again with the Squatty Potty. So they just seem, talk about branding and being consistent with the brands. Just from what I've learned about them, they seem like, genuinely goofy but caring people, and I liked it because I thought, yes, other people are giving things away, And I'm always a sucker for anybody who wants to help a small business. So I think it's great.
Now, the fail of the week is Elon Musk. Oh, God. Erica, I mean, once again, Elon Musk must be stripped of his Twitter account. He tweeted that the value of Tesla's stock was too high, which naturally sent the stock into a tailspin. I mean, this guy in Twitter, what's going on here?
He loves his Twitter. But, okay, so I wanted to pose this to the group. Has there ever been a situation where you have a cult of personality CEO that has worked out? Like, I know that it always tends to work out in the beginning, but I can't think of one example where
Steve
it didn't.
Jobs, Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, that's true.
Larry Sergey.
Steve Jobs, for
Jack
sure.
Dorsey.
But, Sergey Brin, wasn't there that affair situation with Google Glass?
Yeah,
Yes.
but I don't know if it really stopped the stock or the business growth.
True. I don't know that it had a huge impact on stock, but it probably didn't help, right? They probably had to go into kind of disaster relief.
Didn't hurt.
Yeah, cult of personality is problematic, but at the same time, it's just like it doesn't seem to keep Wall Street from putting way too much money.
I think that's the big thing here. Is you sort of look at the scenario and you just realize that like the sort of Wall Street, and in terms of its connection to Main Street, is just so disjointed. Like if you can tweet and do that, it basically shows that there's no connection between what's the business doing and what's the value of the market cap.
I wonder how the book, you probably all have read Good to Great, and I read it many years ago, and they focused on the different type of CEO, sort of the hedgehog CEO who was just kind of did his job and was quiet, and how their stocks did very well. I wonder how a more modern day, if they probably have an updated version.
Yeah, Elon's not level 5, that's for sure.
No.
One thing I can say pretty much unequivocally about these situations is that, a hedgehog or whatever they call it, CEO, is going to be doing as well most of the time as any other CEO. It's just with a lot less drama. I think that, the drama adds to a PR value to the whole company, but it can also harm the PR value. So who knows?
Yeah.
Well, the foul of the week is Omnicom's CEO, John Wren, went public, Mitch, with his irritation with Wendy Clark over her leaving DDB during a crisis in order to take up the helm at Dentsu Aegis. Airing your dirty laundry is, I guess, okay now. It just seems kind of petty.
Yeah, I mean, look, anybody who knows when roles like this shift, this is not a sort of sudden thing that happens in a couple days. It is months and months of planning behind the scenes to make it happen. And I think the intersection of that with the same moment of COVID-19 creates a really good exhaust valve for someone like a John Wren, should he want to pull that valve, to talk about, where the business is at, their strength, their values. And at that point, when things are really distraught, it's easy to toss someone under the bus. It's really bad timing, I think, on Wren's part. I think on both parties' part, to be honest. I think people could have stood back and said, when do we really need to make this happen, considering what's going on in the world today? It wasn't good for Dentsu Aegis. It wasn't good for Omnicom on both sides. Yeah,
but if you look at Omnicom's numbers over the last 7 years, they've been, all holding companies have been flat to barely making any money, and Omnicom's been the best of them. And they haven't grown much. So I'm not sure you could blame it on one person.
No, but it's easy to do that when the numbers aren't great. And trust me, these holding companies are loving this COVID-19 to validate the whole sort of reasoning to hold the numbers back at this point.
The consultancies are cleaning up all the business that they're losing.
There's a lot of internal teams going on too. I don't think it's just the consultancies. It seems to be a lot of internal teams as well, but another discussion for another BeanCast.
Yeah.
Well, if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at the BeanCast. Oh, if I got to say, I totally lost my last part of my script. Basically, that's the fair, fail, foul. If you'd like to contribute to this list, go online and use some hashtag that says fair, foul, and you'll be in the conversation. Okay, there we go. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.